So I saw Jia Ning's question. I'm going to answer in brief. So I was thinking I might need to write a bit, but let me just explain first. If you understand that, I don't have to write. So your question about realization, right? As to whether it's whichever aggregate it is, um, perhaps we got to backtrack and ask ourselves, what is realization? Yeah. Uh, if we understand that uh, realization as wisdom, yeah, um, and then also to understand what is non-realization, yeah, that is ignorance, yeah, then we may have an answer. So to begin with, what is the relationship between ignorance and wisdom? In other words, non-realization and realization. Yeah, the two are intertwined. Uh, in a sense that wisdom is the absence of ignorance, and ignorance is the absence of wisdom. Okay, so far so good.
Can I ask like because I think there are three.
Hang on, hang on. Let me just increase your volume. You may need to speak up.
Can you hear me? Can you hear
Uh-huh.
me?
Somewhat, yeah.
I think there are three parts. One is that ignorance is like you don't know the thing. The other
Uh-huh.
is like false understanding means that you understand wrongly, and then
Come
third,
again with ignorance is what?
you don't know the thing. You don't
Okay.
know the thing, right? The second thing is that you understand wrongly. Then the third is that you understand correctly.
Uh, well, okay, and then
Yeah. So it's not just ignorance and
well, the uh, how is the understanding related to ignorance then?
so if you understand correctly, then so there are three stages, right? You ignorance, you don't know, like for example, you don't know Buddhism. Then secondly is that you understand wrongly. So you know the Buddhism, but you don't know exactly what it is. And then third, only you fully understand how it works and uh, you know how to get rid of the suffering and all this, right?
So only these three part. Then where's the part where there's no more ignorance?
The third part, no?
So third part is basically non-ignorance, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So second part is basically due to ignorance.
Still somewhat some ignorance, yeah, some ignorance in there.
So there's still ignorance. So in which case then you can ignore second part, right?
Okay,
So then there's only two parts, ignorance and non-ignorance.
okay,
So it's still ignorance and wisdom.
okay,
So same thing.
okay, okay.
Okay. So having said that, we agree that fabricated things arise due to conditions.
Mm,
Okay,
mm,
and ignorance is a fabricated thing.
okay,
So and wisdom, strictly speaking, the ultimate relative wisdom is not a fabricated thing. It's the absence of ignorance.
okay. But is it still fall within the five aggregates?
So don't worry about five aggregates first.
Okay,
Okay. Just consider, because the same question can be asked about ignorance. Does ignorance fall under the five aggregates? Okay. But if you can understand ignorance and wisdom, then you don't have to worry about which aggregate.
okay.
Okay. So um, uh, can we agree that wisdom is the absence of ignorance? Yeah, absence of ignorance. Just as enlightenment is the absence of suffering.
Okay, let's just agree first. Yeah,
Let's just agree that this is teaching of the Buddha.
but yeah, okay. But we have to understand, right?
Oh, yes.
Partners agree, well, we have to understand, right?
Yeah. So when you say that, let's just agree first, means you don't understand.
I guess so.
So
I guess I'm not
so
fully
this is the problem. So let's look at the suffering and enlightenment. Nirvana. Nirvana is the cessation of suffering.
yeah, that this one I agree. This one I agree.
This one you agree, huh?
Nirvana is cessation of suffering. Is absence of suffering is nirvana. That this one.
So this one I agree, huh?
Yeah.
So so maybe we can start from here. Okay. So um, we say that we try to remove suffering. Okay. And once you manage to remove suffering, then there's no more suffering. And then we say that you attain nirvana. But actually, it's not that you attain a separate thing from suffering. You attain the cessation of suffering.
Yeah. Correct.
So if you recall in the Heart Sutra, I mentioned before about the aircon and the fridge. Yeah, there's heat and then the absence of heat. And absence of heat, we call it cold. So now there seems to be heat, absence of heat, and cold. Yeah, and after a while, we take cold as a separate thing from heat. So as though there's two separate things. But all the while, there's only that heat. Yeah, and even heat itself is a name given to that thing that actually has no name. Similarly, there's suffering. And because we have been suffering, we don't know that there's an absence of suffering. Then Buddha realized that there is an absence of suffering. He attained to the absence of suffering. And in fact, he used the very word nirvana nirodha, which is cessation, extinguishing. Right? But as we learn about nirvana, learn, after, then at some point, we take nirvana as a separate thing, as though it's a separate thing from suffering. Then as a result, now suddenly there's two things. Then we have to go and ask the question, is that nirvana permanent or impermanent? But to begin with, it is not a separate thing altogether. Can I understand so far?
Yeah.
So that's to say that to go and pursue whether nirvana is permanent or not actually belies the wrong understanding of how nirvana and suffering are correlated.
Sorry, Sifu. So my question is actually not so far yet, not nirvana yet, but
No,
because
because when we talk about wisdom, we're not talking about worldly wisdom. We're talking about wisdom that is that allows us to attain nirvana. And the relationship is identical. So hang on. Here we are talking about the principle of causality. Yeah, which underlies hang on. Let me charge my phone. Which underlies the all the different paths. In this case, suffering, nirvana, ignorance, wisdom. It's the same mechanism at work. It is not that we can attain a separate wisdom separate from ignorance. But okay, here I need you to just hold your thought first. We finished with the train of thought with suffering and nirvana. Then we come back. As to whether you can come back or not, I don't know. But that's how you can understand the ignorance and wisdom. So you You agree that ignorance need conditions to arise, right?
Okay.
Huh? Okay. Okay. It's
Like
very
I
simple.
thought we all start with ignorance since uh,
Start with ignorance. If
yeah.
you the moment you say start with ignorance, that's wrong already. That's
Okay.
wrong understanding.
Okay.
There's no start.
Yeah. Okay.
uh, because if you say start with ignorance means ignorance out of nowhere, book, then from there you start. But what the Buddha observed is for every state of ignorance, there's a precursor ignorance that condition it. In fact, there are three pains, three outflows that condition any state of ignorance. The first is sensual desire, second is existence, third is ignorance. So it is a
Loop. Like,
yeah, it's a recursive loop.
mm,
So for for any present state of ignorance, it is being conditioned by past states.
okay.
And that state in turn can be traced back to some previous state of ignorance. Yeah. So this is a very key part. And I'm sure you heard of it and you know it and you probably accept it. But because many times when you look at the teachings, especially when you look at Paticca Samuppada, seems to start with ignorance, ma. Right? And we also say that the root of all problem is our ignorance. So root has this meaning of the start point. But actually, that's not how it is.
Okay.
So similarly for suffering, yeah, uh, when when there are conditions, then suffering arise. When there are no conditions, suffering don't arise. When there are conditions, then ignorance arise. When there are no conditions, then ignorance don't arise. Yeah. So the previous ignorance conditions the present state ignorance. Okay. But when we look at conditioning, right, it means that just because A exists doesn't mean B must neither exist. It, it has the potential to condition it. That's why when you look at Paticca Samuppada, ignorance as a condition, Sankhara exists. Sankhara as a condition, consciousness exists, and so on. If it is A die cause B, then we are stuck in this loop. Then this permanent loop. Then this loop of the 12 links of dependent origination is something that cannot break down. But because ignorance itself is conditioned and it conditions other things, when there's a break somewhere, then it doesn't arise anymore. Uh, so if you consider the stream of ignorance, right, then halfway through, let's not worry about how you attain enlightenment yet. Let's just say that at some point you see things as they are. And because you see things as they are, then the continual fuel for the next moment of ignorance to arise don't arise anymore. At that point, we say you have the wisdom, yeah, or we can say that, uh, yeah, we can say that when because of that, then there's liberation, yeah. So absence of ignorance then is wisdom, and from there there's liberation. And liberation is basically the fact that ignorance don't arise again. Okay.
Okay.
And from this point onwards, there's no more ignorance to fuel any further wrong perception, to fuel any wrong view, to fuel any wrong anything.
Okay.
So, in that sense, we can say that wisdom is perpetual. Yeah. But the moment you say wisdom is permanent, that's also wrong. Yeah.
Okay. So, Sifu, I want to ask because you say at that point where we see the ultimate truth, right?
Yes.
So the see, is it the perception in that case?
Is the see the perception? Uh, let's assume that it is,
Okay.
and then
So like right now you see it, but then will it like you won't see it again
Like, will you not see it again?
because perception is impermanent.
So perception itself is impermanent. So perception arises and then ceases. So let's consider the whole stream of different perception arising. So all this while, for since beginningless time, we keep on perceiving permanent as impermanent, permanent as impermanent. Oh, sorry. Yeah, permanent as no, impermanent as permanent. Okay, so we keep on having wrong perception. Then at some point we practice, attend a lot of Heart Sutra, every day meditate together. Then one day everybody is still permanent as impermanent. Then you one day permanent, no, sorry, impermanent perceive as permanent, everybody. Then one day you impermanent perceive as impermanent. So you perceive everything as it is. Okay? But still it is a non-constant perception arising.
Will we
So
like forget and
yeah,
then
yeah. So there's two kind of impermanence you're talking about.
okay.
Okay. The first impermanence is what the Buddha talked about. That even the perception itself arises and ceases. Yeah. It's not that the Buddha and the Arahants, they just tung and then in a static state, right?
Yeah.
It's just that subsequent arising of perception has no basis to see it wrongly anymore. But even this itself has a progression. So for the Sotapanna, initially they have that right seeing, but occasionally there may be lapses. Yeah, this is documented in the Sutta. They may have occasional lapses. The difference is that because of the impact of the initial seeing, the lapses are very quickly caught, and so they never detract from the right view, um, causing the subsequent outflow, causing the subsequent problem to arise. Yeah. And having said that, the Sotapanna, for example, they still have greed, they still have hatred, comparatively maybe lower. And Sotapanna is a very broad range also. There may be those who still have strong, fairly strong one. There may be those who are on the verge of Sakadagami already, which is attuned. Yeah, so it's a spectrum again. Okay, so up to the point where a person attain arahanthood is where then there's no more remnants of ignorance. Yeah, no more remnants of ignorance. Then, because there's no more remnants of ignorance, there's no more remnants for wrong perception to arise. Yeah, but doesn't mean that the arahant attain enlightenment and then the perception is a static state. Then it become permanent perception. Uh, so then this second part of talking about permanent or impermanent is what you're talking about, or is the first one. Okay, but to ask whether is the perception permanent, the perception of reality permanent, the short answer is yes. But if you take it the wrong way, then you think that perception is permanent. I mentioned two types, right? Impermanence and permanence. Yeah. So the first one is the fact that even for enlightened ones, the five aggregates arise, cease, right? So this the impermanence that Buddha talked about. But usually when we talk about whether something is permanent or not, we tend to then jump to the other type, which is that it's a static thing. Yeah, the static thing don't exist. Yeah, and then further, the wisdom. Okay, the wisdom itself is not something that you create. It's not something that is apart from the ignorance that you go and attain.
Okay.
It's not something separate.
Okay. Okay. I think I get that the ignorance is dependent, original
Uh-huh.
dependent,
Uh,
and so uh, I think I will try to contemplate on it and see if I can.
mm. But before you go, so um, uh, I think I mentioned in the one of the previous session, probably for Tuesday class, because it was quite a long discussion, um, about how such questions, every time this series of questions come up, I actually share about how um, I have had this question when I was in my 20s. Yeah. So you can also spend the next 20 over years contemplating, reflecting, and reading all the different suttas to to get over it. Or you can ask yourself at this point in time, between you, and this applies to everybody, but especially for Jia Ning, because this is his question. Between you and enlightenment, what is in between? Maybe this is the question that is in between. Okay. Yeah, maybe this is the question that's in between, and you you attain enlightenment, but then you are wondering, hey, is this enlightenment permanent or impermanent? Maybe that's the case. But if that's the case, then that's another scenario, okay? But for most people, it's not. Mm. For most people, this is the very presence of this question um, creates, it's not part of the path. It is actually in the other direction. The question lies in the other direction. And the more you go and go this part, right, it actually detracts you from the path.
So how should we do?
So you got to ask yourself, what are three things that affects you? Maybe this is one of the things. Yeah. But when I say three things that affect you, we're talking about three things that give rise to your suffering. Uh, so as I said, there may be cases where we we are suffering over this. Okay. So, but if there are other things that we are suffering over, I would strongly suggest we work on those as well. Uh, so, for example, maybe your work is also very smooth, no suffering. Then maybe your family, your life with Ming Hui
Mm.
is also very sweet because both of you from NTUBS learn Dharma, practice Dharma together. Yeah. Anything go wrong, then me. Okay. So everything's okay. Then if that's the case, then you must peer deeper. Mm. You must peer deeper and contemplate on how the present state is not satisfactory. 这了，拆散婚姻。You must contemplate on the faults and danger of the samsaric existence. Mm. So the question you had about whether wisdom is permanent or impermanent lies more on, if I can put it bluntly, is more on asking the question about what happens when you attain enlightenment from a point of view of non-enlightenment. Mm. Then you have all the paradox and contradiction coming up. Oh. Mm. But let me throw you a donut. So let's assume, as I shared the last time, I also throw in this donut. Let's assume that wisdom itself is also impermanent. Okay? So it means that even if you work very hard, at some point you attain enlightenment, and then it also goes away. How long? I don't know. Let's assume that it goes away after n number of time unit, where time unit is any arbitrary one. Okay? Maybe it's one split second, then you're back to square one. But at least for the one split second, then we say that you are free of suffering, completely free of suffering. Okay? So far, so good. So, and it could be as long as one kalpa. One kalpa of no suffering, then you suffer again. Maybe. Okay? Now, for the rest who are listening, in case you just chuck in, then you think that wisdom is impermanent. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, let's assume that it's impermanent, then what happened? So then what it means is that if you consider two scenarios, okay, having make that assumption, then we ask ourselves, then is it worthwhile to still do the practice? Perhaps that's a question that you may be thinking about as well. Huh? Yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. But if that's the case, then you have to ask yourself, okay, let's again look at the two scenarios. In a scenario where if if wisdom is permanent, then worthwhile what? One time effort and then you get it for a long time. It's like landed property, right? Landed property, you pay one time, you use it for life, right? Then the impermanent wisdom is like leasehold. Yeah. You lease it for a certain duration of time, you rent it for a duration of time, then after you must give up and then you must work for money and pay again, right? Okay. So in the case of landed property, then don't have to worry. Of course, you must chong. Then how about if it's rental? What if it's leasehold? Is it worthwhile? Okay. Then you must ask yourself again, either you work for it or you don't work for it. Okay. If you don't work for it, that means now we are suffering, suffering. If you don't work for it, you continue to suffer. Occasionally have worldly happiness that lead to more suffering because then you say yes, perpetual. Then so this is very clear. You don't work for it is perpetual suffering on up down, left, right, all the way. Then if you work for it, now this is the scenario where the wisdom is like rental. And maybe it's one moment, maybe it's one day, maybe it's 1 year, maybe it's one kappa, I don't know. Okay. Let's assume first. In which case, then it means that you suffer for so long, and you practice, and as you practice, you start to suffer less, until the point where attain enlightenment, you don't suffer at all. And maybe it's just a split moment. But at least even then, there's that reduction of suffering all the way to that point. Then after that, it increase. How it increase? We don't know. Because this is a hypothesis that we come up with. And if you want to be really complicated and thorough, we can then say that, okay, maybe the suffering likewise increase in a gradual linear progression. Or it may be charged up like a capacitor, yeah, high charge and then slow down. Or maybe it charged up in the exponential rate where gradually it increase and then it goes up. Yeah, I don't know which way. Okay, but let's assume because if it's impermanent, it has to come out in some ways. So if you compare the two graphs, the first one where you don't do anything about it, and the second one where you do something about it, which one has more suffering? Which one has less suffering?
The second one.
Still is the second one. So if your aim is to remove suffering, either way, you should try to strive towards enlightenment, regardless of whether the wisdom is impermanent or permanent.
Super. Can I ask because my question is actually more like when we are doing meditation, right? We try to understand how our mind works, right?
That's part of it. But more importantly, is to understand the way the mind is and the way the body is. Yeah. So the way the mind works comes as the part of the process.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say we have some understanding of how like we
Oh wait, but before we continue, so maybe you had that question earlier that I mentioned, maybe you don't, but that part is clear, right?
Yeah. So because the part is more on like the nirvana, the true realization, right?
Oh no. The part about which one has more suffering.
Oh, this one I know what you're saying. So you are saying, let's say even if we have a temporary nirvana, it is still better than without working on towards the nirvana.
Okay. So
This I agree.
okay, so which means that if you agree, then it means that regardless of how our discussion goes, you are still going to work hard towards nirvana.
Yeah.
Okay, then I can answer more freely.
Yes.
Okay, so then now you are asking the question of, so whether our practice, okay, is should be focused on the understanding of how the mind works.
No, because I'm still asking my original question, because my question is like, let's say we have some understanding about how mind works,
Uh,
even before we like attain Sutapana or somewhere, just like right now as lay people. And then, but sometimes we have some this understanding, but the next sitting, we will not have this understanding anymore.
Oh, so okay, so this part, right, is because our understanding is very superficial. Yeah. So from understanding comes from the contemplation, but the penetrative understanding comes from the realization, which is true cultivation. Yeah. So to answer it very simply, um, most people do not have the clear knowledge of what the process is, the practice is, nor the teachings. Then maybe we listen to Dhamma quite okay, we remember, so we have a clear knowledge. Then after that, we contemplate further, we seem to have an understanding. But there's understandings don't seem to be, sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't see it. Now, then I have a question for you. At the moment where you don't see it, if you were to sit back, yeah, if after the fact, let's say you see, you don't see, you see, don't see, then like now when you go and think back those moments where you don't see it, are you able to see it? Also cannot see it. Okay, so here is where, huh?
See what? Like,
I don't
see
know what I don't know what you see.
the
I'm
moment,
just basing on what you said. You see.
see the moment I don't see it, or see.
Oh. Okay. Valid question. Valid question. So, first of all, you said that sometimes you can see the truth, right? That, or at least the principle, lah.
Yeah.
Okay. Then sometimes you don't see the principle. So see, don't see, see, don't see. Then after the fact, like now, with respect to the part where you don't see, now if you were to go and contemplate on it, are you able to see the principle?
It's the understanding level, not like
Yeah.
yeah.
Are you able to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So here is where I was distinguish between this part into split into two further level, where even at this stage, there are those who occasionally see, but and occasionally don't see, and later on when they reflect back, there are those who when they reflect back somehow they cannot see, and there are those who as long as they are out of that situation and they reflect back, they can see. So between the two, the latter is more superior. So in this category, you are the A1 student. The other one is A2 or B3. Yeah. So the first category, the seeing is very inconsistent, almost sporadic. Yeah. So that's good. But now then the question is, how do you ensure that you always see? How do you ensure that you always see? That's basically the problem, right?
I think the question is
Huh?
probably also like how, whether the thing I see is the truth or not.
Whether it's the truth or not.
Yeah.
Definitely not the truth yet lah. If there's a truth, you will be enlightened already, ma. It's just a concept of the truth. Yeah.
I mean, whether it is a right understanding.
Whether it's same thing lah. I mean, don't keep on using different words. Otherwise, we will be here for 3 hours. Whether you call it concept or understanding and so on, even when we say that we have an understanding of it, um, take for example, take for example, uh, you can understand how a plane fly, but to fly a plane and to be in a plane that's flying is three different things. Agree? Uh, you can read a lot about what wetness is, yeah, and read about uh, all the descriptions of what water is. But to have seen water and touch water is different. So most of the time we are at the level of reading about people's description of water. The descriptions which are written by people who have seen and touched water. So we hear, oh, it's wet, it's moist. And then we try to, because these are words, and these are experiences we have. So the Buddha had to use description that is what we have experienced before. Yeah. But until you experience it, we are just having a knowledge or an understanding of that experience that is described by somebody else. Therein lies that gap. Mm. Oh, but that's not to discourage you or anybody. Yeah. Don't think that as a result that our current understanding is futile or useless. Because like a bridge, one end of the bridge is on this shore, the other end is on the other shore. Just because you take the last step on the last part of the bridge to cross over to the other shore, it doesn't make the first step on this side of the bridge any lesser. It is actually very important as well. Oh, uh, don't. I don't know whether you are having this, but um, it has to go this way. Yeah, you have to start off with something, and your understanding is the something you have to start off with. Uh, oh, does that answer your question?
Uh, but because
If you are trying to ask me, are you enlightened? You are not enlightened.
I'm not enlightened. I'm not.
Yeah.
But because
How come I'm not enlightened yet? Although I understand, how come I'm not enlightened yet? Is that the question?
no, I understand your analogy that
Uh,
like understand how a plane fly and how to fly a plane is different.
uh,
I
so,
understand that.
okay, but you
But
still have a question.
my question is more like okay, this is a first step, but then the next time we forgot, we like fall back the first if like fall back one step again.
Yeah, no, because we never take the next step.
Okay.
No, no, hang on. Can you remember I mentioned that there's two grade?
Too great.
What is the two grade?
Too great off.
The understanding?
One is can know what is understand or what has been seen, and the other is cannot know what is seen.
No. So I'm sure you remember lah. But I mentioned about the part where we see, don't see, see, don't see, see, don't see.
Mm.
Then I ask you, if you were to look back at the scenario where you don't see and contemplate on it, are you able to see the principle? You said yes. Then I said that there are those who, even when they try, they may not be able to consistently see also. So I compare these two as I split these two into two grades. Okay. So the first grade, the understanding is very raw, still very nascent, so not consistent at all. The second one is consistent, but it lacks the right mindfulness. It lacks the penetrative power. And that's why when you are encountering the situation, although there is that right understanding or right view, if you will, but faced with the situation, your understanding has no power, so cannot see. Yeah, that is what's preventing us from seeing. Yeah, so have to do more work. Have to do more work, but not just do more contemplation, which is important also to do more contemplation. But um, contemplation is thinking about things. In a way, it's basically thinking about something. So you need to start to um, in your moment to moment, day to day, go and observe and the see things in a way that is described in the teachings. So give you an example. Like now when you look at the screen, you see a lot of people, right? And you quite instinctively see that there's this person, that person. And in fact, for the most part, you will see um, uh, uh, certain names linked to this person. You wouldn't see colors. Although you see colors, but you don't see the colors. Like when you look at Sifu, do you see the different colors? Or you do see a person? You see a person, right? You don't see colors. Yeah. You don't see a physical thing. You see a person. So if you were to now contemplate on it, you can conceptually understand that, oh, okay, this is a physical form. Yeah, and so on. So bridging the contemplation and the realization is a process where you need to start to really just um, work on the fundamental level of seeing it without further um, labeling. Yeah. So for example, when I was doing walking meditation in US, then at that point in time, we do a lot of different contemplation. So at one point, I was contemplating on the elements. So anything I see, element. Then I like to think that that was the case. So now after the fact, someone walked past, but at that moment, one moment, I was like, something went past. Yeah. And then the next moment, oh, there's someone. So for the most part, if you don't even do this part yet, then the later realization cannot happen. Can I say?
To see the element, try to
Yeah.
see the four elements.
But this is just one example. Don't get stuck with it and think that this is the only thing you need to do. Yeah. In terms of our feelings, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, to see as it just happened. Uh, that that's that is all there is and nothing more. So this is a level of contemplation and the practice that is working on the lower layer of the problem. But the upper layer, not saying you are, but if let's say any of you, let's say you have strong craving for food, then the initial practice is not this. The initial practice when you have craving for food is contemplate on the fouliness of the body and even on the food itself. Uh, then at the lower level layer, then you contemplate on how the food is also just four elements. Because for uh, grosser defilements, you need to use a slightly different technique to overcome it first. Then for the deeper, subtler defilements, yeah, of or wrong understanding or wrong view, then you need to use the underlying technique. Uh, Okay. So, what are the three things that gets to you, that affects you?
Three things.
Okay, before you answer, have you thought about this before?
No.
Never. But you attended Heart Sutra before. Then you're supposed to do exercise. Okay, but don't tease you. Instead of continuing in your trajectory, put a sticky note there. You want to revisit your trajectory. But to help you further your trajectory, you need to look at what are three things that affect you. What are three things that currently you are facing? And then from there, you may have a clear answer of how to take the next step. Okay? Good question. All right. So I must get ready for the next class in 15 minutes time. 愿消三障诸烦恼，愿得智慧真明了，普愿罪障悉消除，
不愿罪障悉消除，
世世常行菩萨道。
世世常行菩萨道。
阿弥陀佛。